everybody. Glad to have you here with us. I have curated a top shelf group of people, many of you who know them, but if you don't, we'll get some introductions. The premise for today's conversation is about the marketplace and where we are in practice transitions, the buying and selling of dental practices in the marketplace today. Who's this for? I think this is for anybody who is active in any regard in the dental space, the dental industry. You could be young in practice right now, just getting out of school and trying to figure out what's your runway. How are you looking forward? You may be mid-career and figuring out what's my exit going to be, even though it might be 5, 6, or 7, or 10 years out. Well, what's that going to look like? And you may be on the last stages of your career trying to figure out right now, do I take an opportunity to exit? Which way do I go? What's involved? But just realizing that all of these transitions, all these stages in one's career, wherever you are in your stage, requires participation. It requires some level of collaboration and some knowledge about what you actually want in your life. Not to follow a model just because someone else did a model, but what do you want? There's a lot of players here and a lot of buyers. We'll define those as we go through here to know who the players are and then give you some pros and cons, some caveats for those of you who are figuring out your pathway from where you are today to what your ultimate exit may be, whenever that might be. So on my screen right now, I have Mr. Brandon Moncrief. Brandon is the principal with McLaren and Associates out of Austin, Texas. Brandon, just give us a little synopsis again of your experience, your history, and how you're involved today in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, David. McLaren and Associates has been around for 35 years. I've been in the dental industry for 20, 10 as a banker and 10 as a practice broker. We specialize in doing practice sales, practice brokerage, appraisals, and sell-side representation on DSO transactions. We do about 60 transactions a year. Most of the doctor-to-doctor transactions we do are in Texas, and we do DSO transactions nationwide. Beautiful.
Dr. Mike Abernathy, the wisdom in the room right here. Your CV is so long, sir, but give us the short shrift of it, if you would. And if you don't tell me the truth, I'm gonna add to it. So go ahead.
I was born and raised in McKinney, Texas, and I've owned 43 practices, and I've been retired for a few years. I write and talk, and as David says, I interrupt people's lives.
Yes, yeah, I interfere in people's lives, but
interfere, that's what it is.
Always in a positive way. Well, at least I see it as positive. They may not see it that way, but you're always good medicine for the soul. So I love having you here. Thank you, Mike. Mr. Jared Duckett of Duckett & Ladd. Again, same thing. Your background, what you're doing today in the industry.
Yeah, so Duckett Ladd CPAs and advisors. We work specifically with dentists and also real estate as well. But really, where we're seeing in the dental industry is just a lot of M&A, right? A lot of people looking to sell, a lot of DSOs looking to buy a lot of practices. So just really work with a lot of clients as they get along the journey to make that exit, if that makes sense.
Beautiful. And Bill, your side.
Yeah, I mean, Jared covered it well. We kind of see, we like working with dentists that are on an entrepreneurial journey. And like every journey has a beginning and an ending point. And I think the beginning point and the ending point are relevant to this conversation, David. So appreciate the opportunity to be on here.
Great. And my friend, Alistair McDonald, you, sir.
My story is one of different industries, 5 different industries. I've had 5 different businesses in 5 different industries, landing in dentistry about 6 or 7 years ago. So I'm probably the newbie to the industry, but had the privilege of working with some really high-performing docs that brought me more into practice ownership. I've owned, bought, grown, and sold a veterinary hospital, amongst other businesses. And was one of the founders and previously the chairman of the Dental Success Network, a group of about 1,000 docs with practices all over the world, actually. So that's what I do. I have a private client group of docs that I work with and some select individuals that keep me sharp and keep me paying attention.
Beautiful. Gentlemen, I'd like to start first with, how did we get to where we are now today? When I was practicing a decade or more previously, didn't have all the options for potential exit we have today. How did we get here? Where did all of the money come from? Why is private equity so interested in our space? I'll just go back to the top. Brandon, you've been around the block for a long time, in banking as well. How did we get here?
DSOs have obviously been around for quite some time, but I would say about 10 years ago, there was a shift in the marketplace from the DSO mentality to where they looked at providers as being extremely valuable rather than just W-2 employees. They started to give them the opportunity to participate in partnership alongside the DSO and private equity's investment. And then about 5 years ago is when that trend started to accelerate. So there's been a tremendous amount of money flow into private equity over the past 10 years as the rich have gotten richer and as the stock market has continued to rise. To properly balance portfolios, you've got to shift some money into private equity. So we've seen a massive amount of cash flow into private equity, and dentistry has proven to be, recession proof, pandemic proof. It's a very fragmented and highly profitable industry, and industries like that gain the attention of private equity. So with DSOs evolving in their approach to dentistry and how they support doctors, combined with a massive influx of cash, it's caused a bit of a fever pitch as far as the acceleration of growth of DSOs fueled through private equity and then cheap bank money, with interest rates being so low. And we've only seen that accelerate, over the past few years.
Yeah, well said, well said. Mike Abernathy, you've been in the industry for many years, certainly a leader in your own right, and one who looked outside your own practice at an early age and started finding other models. And since you've exited your practice some years ago, you're still extremely relevant, helping so many docs navigate what their options are. Give us kind of your overriding picture, how we got to where we are.
DSOs have been around since 1975, and there were some tax advantages, that made it, but the thing that really has driven DSOs is that after about 2003, prior to 2000, it was like 98% of the graduates from dental school became owners. Now, with women being around 51% of the graduates, only 32% of the females and only 67% of the males are becoming owners now. So it's like less than 50% of the graduates from dental school, 6,800 last year, are becoming owners. We've never been in a situation where we had unlimited number of employee dentists. That's fueled corporate practices. They can find doctors to work there. Now with that, you have winners, you have losers. As we're filming this, we had skipped any type of financial recession for almost 12 years. And that wasn't driven just by the pandemic, it was overdue. We're seeing money come in internationally from countries where banking is crashing. And these people are going, if I even get 30, 40, 50% of my money out of this, I'm willing to pay really high dollars for this, especially in Canada. I've seen a lot of Chinese money come in, stuff like that. So it's an interesting deal. But I think too, not to be a Debbie Downer, but I think it's kind of a musical chair. Music plays, music stops, one chair is removed. Some of these corporations will fail. It's a greater fool theory. Equity money comes in when there is a better than average return on their money. And when you look at largest DSOs in the United States, we're seeing debt to income ratios of 8 or 9%. So I don't think that's sustainable. And so I'm not against DSOs. I think it's an incredibly good opportunity for doctors that are near their use before date. I really can't tell you because there's not a long enough track record on happy people on the younger doctors doing this. But we probably have maybe 3 a week that are going with DSOs that I'm familiar with every week. So anyway.
No, that's great. That's great. And Bill and Jared, Mike brought up the point with the number of female dentists that there are more employees available. Maybe also let's bring in the debt side of students coming out and graduating as young dentists. That's also adding to the higher number that are employable. But anything else you want to? I just want to bring that piece out as well.
I think that's a great point, and you guys both nailed it on the head. I'll take a little bit of what you said, Mike, is the mindset of new dentists coming out of dental school, maybe not wanting to be owners, but maybe it's because of that reason, David, is they're going to look for a consistent income stream immediately to start repaying that debt, because that debt load has just increased substantially. it's not uncommon for us, and Bill, I think you'll agree, to talk to prospective clients that are looking to buy a practice and they've got $500,000 worth of student loan debt. And their thought is like, how am I going to repay that? It's so easy to go work for a DSO and get paid X consistent rather than scrape by and create something of your own. So I think it's a lot of that is where the DSOs have really come in. But also, Brandon, what you've said, I think private equity and big money, right, have seen dentistry as that stable, profitable industry that maybe, and maybe you guys might disagree, but has been undervalued in the past, because a lot of these PE groups look at buying other businesses at multiples of EBITDA, et cetera. And I think they're realizing that dentistry is very profitable, very stable, and there's money to be made. And I think the opportunity, the money's there, they want the yield, but also the opportunity's there, because dentists, older dentists, doctors are burnt out and they just want to sell it. They want to get rid of it. So I think the opportunity's there with the money. It's just kind of the perfect storm.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, Jared. I agree. I'll kind of piggyback off that last comment. I think that there is some supply there. And I think through the COVID pandemic, I think that supply has got even higher because people are tired and burnt out and sick of dealing with it. And it was a fever pitch in 2020. And as we move into 2021, 2022, it's still conversations we're having with dentists where they're still, dealing with the lingering after effects of the frustration and the staffing and some state regulations and things. They're just pushing people to exit. And it's not just baby boomers. I mean, these are people who are, 40s, 50s that are looking at exiting. Some of them are willing to look at DSOs and stick on for a while, but most of them, are kind of wanting to move on and try to do something different. So, I think that, again, Brandon, Mike, Jared, and I know Alistair will bring a great perspective too, but everything they've covered is everything that we're seeing. And I will say that, we are getting a lot of people calling, looking at acquisitions, but that's a small minority to the people coming out. And I think they know that going to corporate is a little bit more of a steady paycheck. And at that point, that's going to be hard for them to leave that relationship, even if they have an entrepreneurial bent, because they're going to have a debt load here and they're going to be looking at potentially another major debt load to get a practice. So it is something that I think that there is supply there, but the individual buyers just aren't there at this point.
Alistair, I'm going to give you a lot of leeway here to take all what's been stated so far, which has been right on point. Take it where you want to. I will just start with a little bit going back to how we got to here. You and I have had discussions over quite a bit of period of time that we've had 42 years of declining interest rates, which is, again, is a lot of the reason already brought up here on this panel as to why there's this seeking of yield for a lot of money, and that's driven a lot of this. So I will get your take, but also a little bit of your forecast on. Start looking at what could shift this. The opportunity that we have today is today, and that's great for people who are ready to exit and want to do it on these whatever terms they are. But also want to give a little forecast to people that aren't quite there yet and how things could shift and as they make their plans forward. So let me let you sew into this conversation, sir.
Yeah, thanks. There's already a lot of insight being shared. I think if we look, there's two different things going on. One is the formation and expansion and growth of DSOs. As both Brandon and Mike have pointed out, there's really only ever been two reasons for a DSO to be formed. The first was back in the day, tax benefits, and the second is just simple economies of scale. We can start haggling on prices, we can get better margins, et cetera, et cetera. So there's the existence of DSOs, the pre-existence, the same version inside the vet space is a burgeoning industry. But there's a whole other factor entirely, which is valuations. So we've got a premise that makes sense, the economies of scale, et cetera, interest tax rates, not quite as beneficial as they would have been back in the day, but none of these really speak to the critical piece today, which is valuations. I am of the philosophy, and I think Mike is as well, that we are very much inside of a very large hot money cycle that has poured through multiple industries. And having witnessed this as young as a kid in third world economies, watching what hot money does, One of the most enduring characteristics of hot money is it convinces the recipient that they are God's gift to capitalism, that it's because they are remarkable. Their industry, you never quite understand, and you get all of the attendant narratives. Everybody's moving here for the lifestyle, for a local real estate boom. No one's making any more land. Mortgages, never go bust. If you fill in the blank, this is the narrative, that the siren song of late cycle hot money. I've seen it in mining companies, execs convinced that they're special. I've seen it now in the vet space. I sold my vet practice for about 15 times EBITDA about 6 or 7 months ago. Just preposterous valuations. And where is this coming from? The global hunt for yield. An army of baby boomers who have undersaved and overspent and desperately looking for income, 10,000 of them a day, turning 65 until, 2038 or something. These are huge, huge headwinds to overcome. And as organizations like CalPERS and all the rest of these companies and pension plans and so forth are looking for yield, they increasingly move out onto the margins of credulity there. And so inside of all of these assumptions, including the ongoing extrapolation that DSOs will continue to be trading at preposterous multiples, is a very deeply embedded, insidious trend that, as you alluded to, David, has been there for 41 years. And because of large trends they become insidious, they're just baked into our assumptions. No one's paying attention to trend changes. It was back in August of 2020 that David, you and I and Mike all got to be kind of the crusty old guys in the Muppets up on the balcony, sitting there saying, hey, this is likely to end. And what we're all paying attention to there is interest rates. And I am convinced, as I was at the time, increasingly convinced, that the July 2020 lows in interest rates represent the end of a then 41-year cycle or 40-year cycle of declining interest rates. Interest rates falling, assets that are leveraged off of them, of course, increase in the same sort of teeter-totter fashion that you would expect. One goes down, the other goes up. And with the rise in asset price goes a rise in expectations of future yield, future value. Multiples have gone from X to Y, therefore they'll go to Z. This is happening constantly. It was in March of 2018 that I was at a large dental event, about 600 or 700 docs, and I was making the case that we're very late in the cycle of these ridiculous multiples. At the time, they were 15 or 16 times EBITDA. And I was using examples of hot money in different sectors. And those that were choosing to listen chose to hear that this is late in the cycle in the equity market. That's not where dentists have to worry about. They have to worry about their practice valuation, especially if it's a large part of the nut that they're going to use to fund their future income needs. And at the time, that was the high water mark. 16, one individual I know did a deal at 17 times. This is astounding. Those people were buying losses, amazingly. Fast forward to today, and we're seeing 5, 6 times for those same practices. What's changed? You would think that suddenly there's 2/3 less teeth in a human skull. Well, that's not the case. You would think that suddenly 2/3 of, there's been a 160% increase in the number of practices or dentists. Well, that's not true. What could possibly justify it is the departure of hot money. And I think that those July 2020 interest rate lows are crucial for us to anticipate the future valuations. Because all valuations are a relative trade. Everything is a relative trade. This hot money is saying, if we could get 10% in a profitable practice, give back 3% as a management fee, we're taking the 7% yield. When interest rates are on corporate bonds are 3 or 4%, that's a good trade. But when those interest rates get to 6 or 7, why would we want to deal with dental practices and OSHA and legal oversight and click, sell? This is what worries me. I think it's still out in the future, but it concerns me.
Yeah, well said. So let's take currently today what the market's giving us, and those who are on the precipice of in a position where they want to sell, they can sell if they get a certain valuation and a certain after-tax gain on equity. What are their options today? I mean, doctor to doctor, as you said, Brandon. So a private sale, and then can you guys break down the the DSO market into some additional tranches, or do you want to keep that as a whole? Brandon and Mike Abernathy, probably you guys maybe talk about that a little bit, so we can kind of identify the players, so we can kind of elucidate what these options are, and then some of the caveats. As Alistair said, there's always a trade. So, when you guys start, and let's go down that rabbit hole.
Sure. In the private buyer marketplace, we essentially have two different types of buyers. We have the traditional, doctor that's 4 or 5 years out of school, $250,000 to $400,000 in student loan debt. They're going to buy a practice from another individual, and that's going to be their baby, and they're going to work there full time. Those transactions are still happening every day. While,
and Brandon, that would fit what valuation range for that? Yeah, we need to know what that looks like. So give us that, if you would.
So that's going to be somewhere in the range of, let's say, 70 to 90% of annual revenue. What's a better metric for buyers to use is, let's call it 1.5 to 2 times net cash flow.
Okay.
The other type of private buyer and those transactions are still happening every day. While my company is doing more DSO transactions than we've ever done, the amount of doctor-to-doctor transactions that we've done over the past 35 years has been relatively consistent from year to year. So we're not seeing a drop-off in doctor-to-doctor transactions. We're just seeing another side of the market evolve and become viable, and that's the DSO private equity side. The other type of private buyer that's out there is the entrepreneurial dentist that owns multiple locations. You could call it an emerging DSO, whether they're legally structured as a DSO or not. And that type of buyer is a fit for a seller who may have a practice that's not large enough or profitable enough to sell to a larger DSO buyer, but they want to sell, they want to unload some management responsibilities and stay on post-close. The valuation in that world is going to be almost identical to what it is in the doctor-to-doctor, more traditional doctor-to-doctor sale. And then on the DSO side, I really see 3 different types of buyers and deal structures out there. There's the more traditional, Heartland style model, where they have robust infrastructure. They're going to buy 100% of the practice. They're going to give the doctor, call it 70% cash at close, and put them on a 3 to 5 year earnout, paid contingent upon them fulfilling their employment obligations and possibly the practice maintaining the revenue level that it was at when the practice was sold. So that's one type. I'll call that kind of the traditional DSO model, because Heartland was really the first, big DSO buyer that came to market, and their growth was fueled by the fact that they were operating in an environment where there weren't a lot of other options at that point in time. That's obviously changed now. The second model is, we'll call it kind of the MB2 model, where it's a JV model. So that's where the DSO buys a 60 to 70% interest in the practice. The seller maintains 30 to 40% JV interest in their own 4 walls at the local practice level. And then they have the opportunity to enjoy, obviously, the management infrastructure that the DSO provides, so they can offload some of that burden. They get ongoing pro rata net income distributions, after overhead and the management fee of the DSO is paid. And then typically they have tag-along rights, where when the parent company has a recapitalization event, they're allowed to liquidate a portion of their JV equity at the parent company EBITDA multiple. So there's multifaceted benefits from that type of DSO buyer. And then we have the third is 100% practice sale with an equity rollover. So rather than retaining equity in your own 4 walls at the local practice level, you have the opportunity to sell 100% of your practice and roll typically up to 25% of the sales price into holding company equity. So into equity of the parent company. And that equity is typically liquidated upon recap, either in part or full. And then I'd say that's probably the top 3. And then we've seen some hybrid models where you have the opportunity to sell, let's say, cash out 70% of your practice, have a 15% JV equity interest at the local level, and then a 15% equity roll into holding company equity. So those are the 4 DSO models that are most prevalent. And there's different iterations of each of those models, and each DSO has its own culture, personality, infrastructure. If you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO.
That's right. Exactly. No, that was a great framework. I'll let anybody else jump in. If Mike, everything you want to add any definitions to what I thought was a pretty good layout. So
that was good. I mean, but we are talking when you make those descriptors of the buyers and not the sellers, or the downside to the number 2 and 3. I mean, the reason that they're doing you such a great favor at letting you be a partner with them, and is so they can get into the deal for less money, for money you're never going to see. And so I'm sitting here just getting mad as I'm going, it's like you're betting on the come. I mean, if you're going to leave 20 or 30% in a company, just assume you're loaning this to your worthless cousin and you're never going to see it.
Yeah.
And so it still makes sense if that 60 or 70% is more than you could get on the independent buyer market. And then there is the possibility, but in a way, now this is the old guy sitting at the table here going, your practice, while any business you start should be designed to sell at some point, I think it's foolish to use the sale of your practice as a wealth building strategy without learning how to save and invest money and have passive income. And you're waiting till the 9th inning, and you can't even take a pitch, and it's got to be had three people on base and you hit a home run. And so I think, because the people are going to be listening to this, and I'm hoping that they're not thinking like a dentist. Okay, in the worst possible description you can think of thinking like a dentist, because they see that life preserver thrown to them, and it's really made out of hard sugar that's going to melt in the sea of financial ups and downs. I loved Alistair. I mean, I want Alistair to comment on this, because I think he, I love when he talks about debt being the taxes on future earnings, and you look at kind of, if you're going to sell for 1.5 to 2 times net, why the heck not just work a year and a half more? Or why don't you just learn to live on the money that you have and stop the, your lifestyle suck? I mean, all these things will happen, but getting in bed with a DSO, it's much harder to extricate yourself from these contracts, these management service agreements that you're signing, than it ever was to get in bed with them. And oftentimes there are great companies out there that I respect what they do, but I have yet to see a DSO that has purchased an office, a good office, because generally they start out buying the best offices. They don't want something with no E in EBITDA. Okay. And so they've never purchased an office where they've been able to increase the earnings or decrease the overhead. These companies are built on like fiat credit money. They're built on mergers and acquisitions, not on actual performance and ownership of a business. And that's where, equity money at some point will go, it'll be that Dr. Phil moment where they go, what was I thinking? When I did that. So I'm curious. I want to hear Alistair say something.
Okay, Alistair, we want to hear you say something.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mike. We're just so aligned. It's kind of comical. The couple of things come up for me, as you say, that if that's your plan for your grand exit and you're all in on that, it's very much like choosing to grind it out and defer joy until when you retire. Well, you're all in on that plan. It better work, because when you hit 65 and you've trained yourself to be miserable, the chances of you suddenly finding joy is a low probability outcome. And the same with being all in on the practice. This is what I'm going to sell. Likewise, to these, what I really think of as interlopers, we're all familiar with the term greater fool theory, the idea that I'm willing to overpay for this asset, knowingly do so, because there's a greater fool than I that I'm going to be able to sell this to in the future. By any other term, this is really hustling. This is what we're doing. We're hustling with practices. There's a lot of hustling going on right now with vet practices. The notion that I can pay, 10 times, it'll work out. But just take my own vet hospital, for example. If they're buying it from me at 15 times EBITDA, and this is bumping up, it breaks through any historical precedent. What are the chances of them finding a fool greater than that? They're going to have a hard time finding a buyer. And then finally, to Mike's point about, you better be right. And this is not to say that trends can't stay in place longer than we would expect. I think it's the beautiful old saying, the market can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. I think it was Keynes who said that. So we get to be, as the crusty old guys, we get to be frustrated in the sense of when is this madness going to end, so that we can get back to the real business, which is what Mike's pointing to, which is value creation, not moving things around on the desk and trying to find a greater fool than I. And the last point is really about this kind of MB2 model, very prevalent, very popular right now, as Brennan pointed out. I think, speaking to our friends who will hopefully find some thoughts to reflect on in our time together here, those that are catching, one of the most dangerous things is a kind of disequilibria or a breakdown in the ratio between responsibility and authority. This is crucial. What so many docs don't realize is by selling to a DSO, they are yielding authority, but retaining responsibility. This is a trap. This is quite literally how somebody gets caught on the wrong side of a trade. The ratio between responsibility and authority has to be 1-to-1. Whether it's we're doing it for our practice manager at location number 5, or we're doing it to somebody who's going to be head of hygiene, you have to make sure that whatever responsibilities is matched by an equivalent level of authority. When we sell to a DSO, particularly one who, say, is based in Texas, but I live in, Washington, I am on the ground. I am the one who has to listen to that front desk person disrespect a patient on the phone. I have all of the responsibility of dealing with that in real time, but none of the actual end authority that the parent company has to superimpose their own philosophy of what do we do with disgruntled patients, for example. That's just a really small example. But that's what they're doing. In the service of hot, quick money, they're yielding the most valuable thing that they have in their practice, which is at the root of everything they've grown, which is the authority to make the changes needed in a dynamic work environment, which is what a practice is. And I would encourage everybody to pay all the attention you can to keeping that ratio at 1-to-1.
Yeah, well said. Bill and Jared, jump in, insights into the conversation.
I'll just jump in there real fast. I mean, kind of going, Brandon, you laid that out perfectly, all the different structures, and you're spot on. Is if you've seen one DSO, you've seen one DSO, because they're all different. Regarding, we mentioned the JV MB2 model, regarding coming in and buying 100% of the practice and an earn out, the culture, the economies of scale and the infrastructure they bring with it. So they're all different. So a lot of people, I talk to some people and they're like, well, DSOs, they're a 4-letter word. And some people are like, no, I love DSOs. It's just, there's a lot in between. And so when you're looking for that exit, go rewind this and listen to Brandon and all the different options he mentioned. Start with the end in mind. Think about what you want out of a potential exit. Is cash your number one priority? Upfront cash. Is it you're willing to stay on for X amount of period? What's the culture? What's the infrastructure? All that. Think through all that and then piecemeal through what makes the most sense to you. So you got to think with the end in mind and look at all the options because they're all just totally different.
Yeah, and I'm going to jump in and kind of take the track of Mike talking about people looking at their exit as their investment strategy. That's how they're going to fund their future cash flow. And we do see that. And I do think that's very dangerous. And the problem we tend to see is people who have that mindset, their practice is typically kind of run into the ditches right now. And so What they've done is they've shot themselves in the foot on that strategy, because their multiple is going to be much lower because there's no profit in the practice, there's no eat, what you're saying. So, when I kind of look at this, I don't think that's a bad strategy to have, the end in mind of how you want to exit and you'd like to get a good multiple. But I think what you have to do is look at that and say, well, what am I going to do in my practice now to set myself up for that potential, knowing worst case scenario, I maybe don't have the exit I want, but I've had a very profitable practice kicking off cash flow, allowing me to put money to work and do what I need to do, to kind of replace my income stream, like you say, David. And I've had a practice that now is a high performing, profitable practice, which dental practices still can be in this environment. So I think that we see people get too trigger happy. They're wanting to move. They're wanting to get this thing done. And they don't stop to think that, hey, maybe with a little intentionality, I can kind of get my head right, get back in the game, start making some profit. And a lot of times we see that will get people's timeline shifted out a little bit, where they can kind of get the runway back and have a profitable practice along the way.
Well, to jump in, Bill, you're spot on. And I always use the car analogy in this regard, because if you're going to go sell your car, you're going to go clean it first, right? Most people don't sell their car to another person or trade it in. If you got your kids' French fries shoved in the car seats, right? You go clean it up, vacuum it, detail it, everything. Same thing on a practice. That's what Bill's talking about. What's your runway? Start cleaning that car up, because you're going to get more out of it on a trade-in or potential sale than you would if you just sold it now.
Mike, I want to give something to our listeners who are younger in career. They're maybe no more than 15 years, in a career, less than that. Given the fact that we are seeing margins decrease for those who are participating with PPO insurance, we're seeing the conglomeration and consolidation with DSOs who have the economies of scale that I, as a solo practitioner, very hard to deal with. What advice could you give to those who have a longer runway and they're not ready to take advantage of an exit anytime soon? What do you see the future for them? What should they be considering, Mike, in terms of a longer ability to stay within profitability and not be harangued by decreasing margins and profitability?
I follow about 15 Facebook groups, and a lot of the comments are given by younger doctors. And you're reading, you're kind of going, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're saying, And so, I probably was saying that 30 years ago too. There's higher debt coming out, more competition, but there's some generational proclivities that are defining the limits of what they're going to be able to do. The best places to practice aren't going to be in the best places to live. It's not going to be Dallas or, Denver or something like that. I'm not so worried about their debt as their entitlement mentality when they get out and say, I've got a license, I'm a doctor, I deserve these things. But I think generationally, you see millennials, X and Ys, that they really don't want the ownership. Now, it was interesting in the end of 2019, in the start of 2020, when we first hit the pandemic, Facebook was saying, man, I am glad I'm working for this DSO or this corporation. They're taking care of me. This is awesome. I had Big Brother taking care of me. And then by about June, they're going, I've had enough of this crap. So it weaves back and forth, but it is concerning to me that they're not going into ownership, because I still think ownership is a great thing to do. It's not only learning to be able to provide a service in a consumer-driven business where people vote with their feet and their wallets, because that'll translate to anything you want to do later. Okay, it's almost like, dude, you need to check some boxes and have some creds of just learning to do what it takes and adapt. And yeah, you want to guard core, the validity and, the things that you really believe in, but you also have to embrace change. And, when Alistair talked about trends, 1973 Megatrends, that book talked about how you could look at things happening. I think the example I gave in World War II, the Axis, and reading and be able to understand what was going on, even though you weren't supposed to be able to. That there are states where things are happening that you can look at, like California and Florida, that'll be maybe 5 years ahead of Dallas, 10 or 15 years ahead of Arkansas. And you can look real smart if you start looking at the trends. the good thing about recessions and the good thing about bad times is it's a great time to step up and own. And because again, it's just not that hard to make this happen. And again, when you talk about managed care, I think it's an unusual trait of dentists where they think denial is a river in Egypt. They have this, they believe that this isn't a double standard, that, oh, I don't have to take insurance, which is fine if you can make a great living without doing it. But nationwide, it's 75% in insurance penetration. There are some areas that you probably aren't going to make a very good living if you don't. So on Facebook, I see these young people looking at this going, well, I'll never do that. I'll only be fee for service. But I'm sitting here thinking, I'd rather be a Tarzan in a managed care jungle than die in a fee for service practice and think that was bad. Dentists don't want to do managed care, yet when they go out and buy medical insurance, they buy a PPO. Okay, I mean, there's just some trends that are undeniably predictive of what's going to happen in the future. And I'm all for fee for service practices. I'm all for managed care practices, as long as the doctor can save about 20%. He really enjoys his profession. The patients love him. There's consistency of staff. Things don't roll over, and they grow, in any environment. So yeah, I'd want them to go out and do it. The debt is not that big a deal as long as they don't, it's just they dedicate their life for the first 4 or 5 years to building a practice, controlling the debt, and having goals that they stay with, and stick with. I've never worked with a young doctor that we couldn't pay off all of his debt in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, with
Ever.
discipline. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Brandon, I'd like to get your take on kind of the same question as you're advising or giving counsel to those who come to you to ask you whatever stage they're in. But again, younger docs, same thing. What additional points of reference would you give them?
I agree with Mike in that practice ownership is still the best avenue to pursue in dentistry. And I love how he related it to other aspects of your life and just a better understanding of the world through business ownership. We have seen the private party docs that have bought practices over the past 5 years thrive, regardless of those that did it intentionally and were prepared, have thrived and increased revenue, profitability of the practices they've purchased almost across the board. So I think it's still the best route for a young dentist to pursue. Money's cheap and relatively easy to get. And the DSO option is always out there later down the road if they want to take a look at it. And to kind of go back to some of the comments that Mike and Alistair have made regarding DSOs, from a seller's perspective, I love that you've got a really balanced panel, and some of the information that they've given some of the people that are looking at the DSO option. I would say their comments should serve as a warning. And if you are going to pursue the DSO option, you've got to start with why. You've got to be intentional, and you've got to be pragmatic. You've got to understand your options, explore your options, and make sure that you create a highly competitive environment for your practice, so that at the end of the day, you're going to end up with the best result. So I appreciate the warning that they've given regarding hot money and how private equity works and what's happened in other industries, prior to that money entering the dental industry. And it's critically important that everybody get educated about their options, rather than you have a bad day and you respond to a letter you got in the mail, and before you know it, you've sold the goose. Because we see that happen over and over and over again. And it's the reason that we've become an advocate for sellers in the DSO marketplace.
Great, well said. Same question. Let me go back to the other three of you. Alistair, jump in. The pathway for younger docs. Any additional caveats or heuristics that you would give them to consider?
Well, I try not to put my thumb on the scale too much with clients of mine, but I definitely will in this case for business ownership. While I teach and help with strategy and tactics and these types of things, team cultural leadership training, etc. This is really just a Trojan horse into which I've really inserted my deep-seated Machiavellian grand scheme, which is to just help people love business ownership. It's just one of the most gorgeous laboratories of self and global discovery that is unmatched. I mean, there's nothing else that's going to keep you as honest, reward you as well, and punish you for your foolishness like business ownership. And I think that, we've got the saying in Zulu, "Mkhonto wesizwe," the sharp end of the spear. I chose to put myself there with my first business at age 18, and I've never looked back. So I definitely am a fan. Beautifully, if we're quite honest with ourselves, which is the root of all progress, honesty, dentistry is to a certain extent somewhat of a walled garden, as a client and friend of mine put it. And it's true. We don't always want to hear that because we want to make sure that we're exceptional. But there is an element of it being a walled garden. Even a poorly run practice is going to give you a great lifestyle. This is not true if you're in the biotech space, for example, or many other sectors. And so this is a huge luxury. And I actively encourage practice ownership, because what this does is it gives you either a hammock into which you could lie and kick around and work for 20 years and to have a beautiful family and lifestyle, or you can choose to see that net not as a hammock, but as a safety net, and get out there on your trapeze act and really go for it and do cool, big, exciting things. And I think business ownership is just a beautiful invitation for just that.
Great. Thank you. Bill, Jared.
I agree with what you said 100%, Alistair. I mean, if you look at our dental momentum journey, right, phase 1 of our journey answers the question, is practice ownership right for you? And it's not a right or wrong answer. It depends on the individual, and so I'm a huge advocate for practice ownership. If we start talking to that young doctor and they're like, yeah, this excites me, this sort of thing, push in that direction, because I think practice ownership is absolutely fantastic. If they're talking about, because practice ownership is just not, you're doing dentistry here and then over here you're still doing dentistry, but you're the owner. All the other things that come with it, the leadership aspect, managing the team, trying to put in processes, that's additional work on top of just dentistry, right? And so do they want that? Does that excite them? If yes, let's go. If not, and they're like, I kind of just want to do dentistry and stay over here, then that's the right answer for them. So we just we don't really steer people in the right direction, I guess, or I guess sway them in one direction or the other. We just get inside their head and figure out where their mindset's at, what excites them. And then I guess we do steer them to yes or no. So it depends.
Yeah, you're spot on, Jared. And that's kind of what we see, is that realistically, when you look at the world or the economy in general, there's employees and then there's business owners, and many people are more than happy to go to a job and come home and watch Netflix or do whatever. And that's fine. That's their lifestyle. That's what they want to do. That's what, energizes them. And there's nothing wrong with that. We tend to try to attract people with an entrepreneurial bent who do want to be that tip of the spear, like Alistair said, that understand that it's not easy, but it can be the most rewarding thing you do. And it can be one of the most enjoyable things you do. But there are pillars and things you have to focus on. There is leadership. You have to deal with team. A lot of times people are concerned with teams and dealing with people. So, our goal is to try to educate and let them know what the business of dentistry looks like. Mike Abernathy's been huge for us in trying to teach us so we could teach our tribe. And it is not for everybody, but if it is, then it's an exciting journey. And you get on that journey, and like I said, it has a beginning and end, and all throughout the way, there's going to be ups and downs, but it is a lot of fun. So that I think Jared said it perfectly. We don't try to sway people one or the other, but if they do have a little bit of an entrepreneurial bent, that's when, I think it's time to start educating and getting them ready for that journey.
Yeah, beautiful. All right, let's put a wrap on this. I'll give my little short wrap, and then I want to just go around the horn one more time, and any last comments you'd like to deliver to our listeners or to our viewers. I would say along this journey, the entrepreneurial journey, whatever path you decide to take, to me, the most important thing is not to try to do it solo. We were taught, early in life and in school and education, that we had to carry carry all the weight and do it ourselves. And to an extent, that's true. But out in the real world, you've got to find people wiser with more experience than one has individually, and gain the collective of that wisdom to help you gain clarity. Back to Jared's point about clarity: who am I? What do I really want? And to be able to show me down the path, like Alistair does as a guide. This is what's up in front of us, and we could take the south ascent, we could take the north ascent, or we could take this over here that'll take us longer. But I need someone to give me a little bit of that. That's what you've done here today in a short bit of time. So that's what I will leave this with. Let me just go back to the top of my screen. Brandon, last comments from you, sir.
I really appreciate being part of this, and I think we covered a tremendous amount of ground today. I agree with you. It's critically important to amass the collective knowledge of your advisors to help you make intentional decisions, because they're hugely impactful, not only on your practice and your career, but also on your personal life. I can listen to Alistair talk all day. I got to figure out how to get one of those accents and get rid of my Texas accent, but I appreciate you having me.
Thank you, Brandon. Mike.
I would like to give one, I don't know who's going to be listening to this, but I'd like to give one plug to DSOs. Okay. If you're at the end of your career, there's a point in your career, if you've decided, I don't want to be in dentistry, but you've been super successful, a DSO may be your only buyer. I mean, it used to be you could sell fractional shares, you could retire in practice, but when you really have a monster, that may be your only option. And it is a great option for some doctors that really want out. And again, David would say this, I mean, he talks about real estate or some form of investments that protect your principal and has a great return, and you minimize the danger to your money. I think the nice thing about listening to somebody like this is thinking ahead further than this year or the next 5 years or the next 10 years. So if you're young, I mean, I hate to tell you, we've been there, we're looking back, and I wish people had told me the things that these people are trying to tell you now. So be careful who you choose for a mentor, because these people need to become partners with you in what you want to do. Come along side by side, just like your staffs, just like your attorney, your CPAs. You need to trust them, just like getting in a foxhole. You need somebody to cover your six. And I'm very careful about who I choose, and you get wiser about that. The problem is there are a lot of supposed experts. And if I was looking for somebody to invest my money, I'd go, yeah, I might consider that. Let me see your portfolio for the last 3 years.
Yeah. Well
Good
said.
people go, fine, great, look at it. You
Yep.
know, I want to know track record. So
Exactly. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautiful. Jared.
Yeah, real quick, I just jotted down 4 things. And first off, appreciate you having me on here. I had a blast. You guys are way smarter than me, so I appreciate you being here. 4 things I wrote down. Just like I said, start with the end in mind. So think, what do you want out of an exit and the timeline? All right, so think that through. Number 2, consider all your options. Brandon, you went through all the different doctor to doctor, JV, full DSO. Consider all your options. And then when you're looking at those options, narrow them down, okay? Let's say you're talking to one, let's say DSO, or one maybe doctor to doctor. Talk to other people that have sold to that DSO. And don't ask that DSO for the recommendation. Find out who did not behind their back, but somebody that they don't know they sent you to. What's their experience now once they've sold to that DSO? And then 4, like you guys said, don't do it alone. Do not put a for sale by owner sign in your front yard of your dental practice. Surround yourself with the right people, because this is probably one of the biggest decisions you're going to make.
Absolutely. Bill.
Now you see why I'm partners with Jared. He has such an analytic mind and can kind of take this and boil it down to bullet points. I kind of come from more of a 10,000 foot view. And I think what I really enjoyed about this conversation, Brandon, you said it well, is it's a balanced panel here. And, it does feel like it may have come a little heavy handed against the DSOs. And I think what I would say is, don't look at this as a binary option where either we hate DSOs and we're not even consider them. We're only going to do this over here. Do exactly what Jared said. If you set your practice up and it has that E in EBITDA, then look at your options. It doesn't hurt to go talk to a Brandon and see what's out there, because every DSO is different. And some of them are going to be more doctor friendly. Some of them are going to be more, There we say draconian. I mean, they're all different. So don't look at this as a binary discussion. Look at all your options and figure out what you want and what fits that plan the best.
Well said. Well said. Alistair, bring us home.
To clarify a point that I probably hadn't made is when we speak about valuations and so forth, I don't really see, outside of specialists, anybody really overpaying for practices today like there were 3 or 4 years ago, just in my opinion. I don't think these are unreasonable valuations. So if you're out there and you're thinking about doing it, of course, you always want to look for a good deal, but I think that they're, on the whole, this is a reasonable valuation level that we're at. I thought it was preposterous 3 or 4 years ago. I think the real danger is not so much securing a practice today or choosing to sell today, as much as it is baking into your plan an assumption that you will buy one for 5 times, but sell it when that EBITDA gets back to 15 times. Based on my experience in multiple industries, in multiple cultures and environments and sectors, that hot money is extremely unlikely to come back. And this is certainly my reputation here. I do not see us selling a standard GP practice for 16, 17 times EBITDA again in our working experience. The good news is the industry is still so great, you don't need ridiculous outcomes like that. To Mike's point, you don't need to go all in on that being your plan. If that's your plan, it's not a plan, that's hope. So I think it's if you're into it, great. Whether or not you want to buy or sell, I remind myself all the time, as I do clients, that we're all paying a price for the results that we're getting. All the time. In our health, our relationships, our practice, our business, we're all paying a price for the results we're getting. And the question always is, can I pay a lower price for the same or better results? And you get to decide what's true for you. Are you willing to be the person that has to go down and fix the broken pipe on a Sunday morning? Then ownership is perfect for you. Or is your definition of success a practice or an associateship position, or sell to or join someone else, a DSO or anyone otherwise, and focus on other aspects of creativity and ambition in your life, supported by a beautiful, stable, well-earned income? There's no version of this that you'll do wrong, with one exception: doing what others have prescribed for you. I found that to be the only way you can really go wrong, is thinking you need to be someone else and do what they did to make yourself happy. Didn't work for me. Don't recommend it for others.
Gentlemen, I certainly appreciate your time today. Great panel, great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, David.